Hello all. In today's video, we will talk about event dispatchers and how you can use them to implement functionality into your gameplay blueprints. Let's jump in. First, what is an event dispatcher? For an event dispatcher to function, there is a relationship between two blueprints. Blueprint A, which calls the event dispatcher, is listened to by Blueprint B. Blueprint B, depending on how it uses its own functionality, will listen to and respond to the event dispatcher in the way of its choosing. Let's jump in. First, in our content drawer, we will create an example that illustrates this relationship. So I will create two blueprints. First, create a blueprint of type actor. We will call this BP_timer dispatcher. This will be the blueprint that has the event dispatcher and it calls it on a timer. The other blueprint will be a listener. I will duplicate this by pressing Ctrl D, and I will call this timer listener. This will be the blueprint that listens for the event dispatcher. I will right click one more time, creating a Niagara system. I will use a new system from selected emitter. I'll hit next and use the omnidirectional burst template. I'll press plus and then finish. I will call this ns_simple burst. Okay, first let's open up our timer dispatcher. I'll double click and we'll go to our event graph. On event begin play, I will pull off and I will say set timer by event. I will pull off the red delegate pin and say create event. I will click the select function. I will say create a matching event, and I will say timer event call. In the bottom left is where I can add an event dispatcher. I'll press the plus sign. It says new event dispatcher, and I will change the name to call, or actually I'll call this ed_timer dispatcher. I'll drag this into my graph, and it will come up with a series of options. I will use the call option. I will drag this execution pin here. And now back up here in timer by event, I will grab the green float pin and I will say random float in range. And I will select a min and max value between 3 and 5. And I will set looping to true. I will drag my selection over this and add a comment by pressing C on my keyboard. And I will call this set timer on begin play. I will drag over this, press C on my keyboard, and say call event dispatcher. And now we're good for this blueprint. Again, this is the one that will call the event dispatcher, and the one we will edit in just a moment is what will listen. So let's open up our other blueprint, the timer listener. I'll double click. And in this one, what I will do is I will add a reference so that we can listen for our other blueprint. So the name of it, again, is timer dispatcher. So in my listener, under variables, I will press the plus sign to add a new variable, and I will call this timer reference. Or you could call it dispatcher reference. How about that? So dispatcher reference. And this will be the blueprint that is calling the event dispatcher. So again, that class is type timer dispatcher. So I will type that here, and I will create an object reference to that blueprint. And I will click this little eyeball here to make that exposed to the outside. I'll compile. And so on begin play, what I will do is I'm going to drag this onto my graph, and I'm going to say get. I will right click and go all the way to the bottom to convert to validated get. And I will connect this here. And now I'm going to pull off of this, and because I have this class type, I can access all of the information for that blueprint. So I can say bind to, and the event type that we created was named timer dispatcher. So I can pull off and say bind to timer dispatcher. So then this is now the event dispatcher we created in the other blueprint. So I'll hit return. And then off of this, we say, okay, how do we want this to react in this blueprint? So I will say create event. And again, here I will create a matching event. And I will say timer reaction. And now here we get to choose what do we want to happen every time this event dispatcher is called. So in this situation, we're going to say spawn system at location. The location is going to be the default scene root of this blueprint. So I'll pull off here and say get world location. I'll drag this in here. And then the asset type in the system template is the one we created, simple burst. So I'll use the gray arrow here to drop this in. I'll drag a comment over this and say spawn system on event dispatcher. And on begin play, I'll drag a comment over this and say bind to event dispatcher. I'll compile and I'll save. So now let's just make sure that we're clear on the relationship between these two blueprints. So what I'll do is put these two next to each other, and this on the, I'll actually do this. This is our dispatcher and this is our listener. So on the left, we're going to basically say every X number of seconds, call this event. On begin play, our listener on the right sets itself to listen for this exact event. So now every time this event dispatcher is called, the event that is pulled off of here is going to happen. So every time, every 3 to 5 seconds, this event and whatever functionality is attached to it is going to be called. So let's drag this into our viewport so we can see this in action. So first we'll drag our dispatcher here, and I'll press G so I can make sure I see just that sprite. And I'll drag my listener out here. Again, we need to make sure that we reference our dispatcher. So I'm going to, in this situation, I'll just drop down and it's the only one in my map, or I could use the eyedropper. I'll drag this up, and when I press play, we'll see that it's going to every 3 to 5 seconds spawn a little particle sprite. So that's all for today's video. I hope you found this useful. Again, event dispatchers are a super valuable tool to have in your arsenal, and hope you found this useful and use it in your projects. Thanks all, and have a great day.